Hey guys, this is Justin. Hello and welcome to another video. And today we'll be looking at something pretty interesting, some insight into the creative process behind the sequel trilogy from Star Wars author Jason Fry. Jason Fry, by the way, is actually one of my favorite Star Wars authors, period, and the reason why he has this insight is because he was responsible for writing the novelization for Episode 8, which for a lot of people was the best novelization of the sequel trilogy. I was a little unsure whether I wanted to post this video or not because I find discussion of the sequel trilogy, especially if there's a negative aspect, often leads to the discourse just absolutely devolving, but there are some interesting bits here that I think you guys might find interesting. If you want to read the entire interview yourself, by the way, you can go to the Reddit page, which I've linked down in the description. I'm not going to go over every question, but I will focus on some that I think are probably what you guys will most want to learn about. One thing that I found particularly interesting was how much leeway a novelization author has when it comes to changing or adding on to the story. And one of the things we learn in this interview is how the author sort of has to walk a tightrope between making the story interesting and expanding it as a novelization does, but not going outside the bounds of what the author or what really Lucasfilm as a whole intended with the sequel trilogy. The difficulty, of course, that there wasn't a cohesive vision. One question asked specifically, were you told about how much of a plan there was for a cohesive trilogy? Was a clear vision presented to you? Which Jason Fry responds to by saying, nope, I knew nothing about the Rise of Skywalker when I wrote The Last Jedi novelization, and I have no idea how much of that storytelling had been settled at that point. So obviously, it's very difficult to expand on a story in a way that won't box you in the future when you have no idea what the future holds. It's kind of crazy to think about the fact that even when writing the novelization, there was no idea that Palpatine would be back in the next movie, and you can imagine how the novelization and Episode 8 would have benefited by being able to foreshadow the conclusion a bit more easily. I know I talked about that idea a lot on this channel. I'm not unique in saying that obviously the sequel trilogy should have had some general direction. I guess it's just disappointing to have it laid bare once again. Another thing that I found particularly interesting was how sort of expanded universe lore, I mean, not lore from Star Wars Legends, but lore from canon books and comics and whatever else, get tied into a novelization. And it does seem like a lot of that is up to the author and they get to choose from material that they like. That's definitely something we also saw in Star Wars Legends. For example, if Timothy Zahn was involved, you'd know that his characters that he created, like Mara Jade and Talon Karrde, would probably make an appearance. Troy Denning was well known for having a bunch of his characters that he sometimes put into situations like Alim Arar. Personally, on my end, when it comes to working on canon material like novelizations, I would like to see the story group take an active role, maybe more so than they are right now, and encourage extra connections and whatever else for the author to put in if they so choose. Not to force it, but there's definitely cases where an author has their own vision for something or they're only familiar with a part of the lore. I would like to see those connections made a little more easy. One question that a lot of you guys will also probably find interesting is what Jason Fry's opinion on the movie and the sequel trilogy as a whole was. And it's pretty much an understatement to say that Jason Fry's favorite movie was Episode 8. He goes into the parts of that movie that he likes in the interview. I don't want to go too far into this because he's honestly just another guy. He is a Lucasfilm employee, but he doesn't speak for Lucasfilm, and I don't think an individual's thoughts on the sequel trilogy are especially important. I will note, however, that he does point specifically to the character of Finn, noting that while The Last Jedi did a not perfect job with his character, he felt like The Rise of Skywalker generally, and this is a quote, didn't stick the landing. He said the movie tosses Finn and Rose's relationship overboard in a way that felt disrespectful, which is a quote that I think a lot of people will probably attach to, and it sketches out an interesting story for Finn, but does very little with it. And I do agree with that generally. I like the idea of Finn becoming Force sensitive, even though not everyone in the universe needs to be, but they really should have played on his Stormtrooper rebellion idea that a lot of the fans wanted, not because it was a fan popular idea, but because it would have been an interesting way to show how someone can fight without actually having to shoot somebody, an ideological war. He also touches on the fact that actors shouldn't necessarily have a say on on the direction of their character. Now, often they will have insight, and he gives the example of Carrie providing some feedback about her character in episode 6, but that doesn't mean they know where the character should go in the overall story better than anyone else. Of course, that's a reference to Mark Hamill's quotes about The Last Jedi, which I think by this point have been taken a little bit out of context, but also, of course, John Boyega's complaints with episode 8 as well. And if the way I'm phrasing this sounds disrespectful at all to the movies or the characters, that's just because I'm summarizing it, and that's definitely not the way that Jason Fry writes. He acknowledges the voices that each one of these actors have, and that they do have intimate knowledge with the character, but again, I think his distinction is mostly right. That doesn't mean that I personally like John Boyega's depiction in episode 8. I think that's where my main point of divergence on that character would be, but let's move on. The questions that I saw getting discussed most after this interview were related, of course, to Adam Driver. This interview actually did originate on an Adam Driver fan subreddit. For one, Jason Fry says he believed it was pretty likely that at some point we will be getting a book about Kylo/Ben Solo and that he would love to write it. He acknowledges that it would be a surefire hit. He talks about how ultimately Kylo Ren is an unreliable narrator when it comes to the events of the burning of the Jedi Temple, although he doesn't necessarily realize that he's telling the wrong story or the wrong version of what happened. And he touches on whether there was actually a romance between Rey and Kylo, and I think he sort of comes down with an uncertainty. For me personally, when I watch episode 8 and episode 9, I think it's very, very obvious that there is meant to be a romance. I mean, they kiss at the end, there's the hand touch in episode 8. For me, that was more than just a friendship or some sort of forced connection, because yes, those things do exist in the Star Wars universe, but ultimately Star Wars is supposed to tell us stories about growing up, and an aspect of growing up for a lot of people is meeting a partner. But for him, whether the kiss at the end of The Rise of Skywalker was meant to be romantic, I don't think ever got settled. That's his quote. Finally, and I'm going to read this last answer out so there's full context and so I don't accidentally clickbait anyone. He says, would you have predicted death or living redemption for Ben based on The Last Jedi? He says that he likes the symmetry, and I quote, I have no idea what future storytelling holds, so I better not see this reappear as some clickbait prediction, but The Rise of Skywalker showed us that some connections are stronger than death. Han appears to Kylo, and Rey gets a vision of Luke and Leia on Tatooine. Do you really think that the only vision she'll ever see? Didn't Luke tell us that no one's ever really gone? And that's the end of the interview. A very interesting one from a very talented Star Wars writer. Now, I don't necessarily agree with a lot of his subjective opinions, and he acknowledges that those are just opinions of his. Some people like The Rise of Skywalker more than The Last Jedi. Some people were disappointed with both. For me personally, there are elements of episode 8 that I like, but a lot that I don't. Nonetheless, I'm going to link to the entire interview down below. I think it's very interesting. And guys, especially in the comments, please try to be respectful. I know it's very tempting to see a video about Star Wars, the sequel trilogy, and you see it and you get all excited and you write a comment about how the sequels suck and Kathleen Kennedy and whatever. Let's just watch the video and try to have a conversation where something substantive happens. Till next time though, guys, have a good one, be safe, and may the Force be with you.